Unfortunately, Marius, who was supposed to moderate this panel, had to cut out to make a flight. So I'm going to take over moderating duties for this. We have two great speakers, Sergio Godoy Etcheverry and Huseyin Bayazit, who are going to talk today about media concentration in authoritarian countries. And of course, how should others respond? So I'm going to invite Huseyin to start it off.
Thank you. Thank you, Chase. So like the authoritarian regimes, it is really needs the better classification. Like in the literature, we see neo-authoritarians and etc. I call Turkey as a semi-theocratic authoritarian regime. And my presentation will have three sections. One of them is the drivers of political change in an authoritarian media system. In Turkish case, then describe four forces of an independent and enabling media system, particular stress on the Turkish media structure and management system, including editorial decision-making, that are responsible for the authoritarian acts. And the last one will be making some recommendations. I think state is innocent. It's not blame the state. I think the media is authoritarian. That's the point, Turkish case. And including civil society or NGOs, particularly fighting for the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and etc. God bless you, by the way. And in order to define the drivers of political change to convert or transform authoritarian regimes, there are two, like institutional variables and leadership variables. And in terms of institutional variables, there is formal one like constitutional arrangements, and informal ones like social and cultural norms and strength and the nature of the political patronage. I don't want to go into that. And leadership variables, including individuals, which means parliaments and bureaucrats, and private sector media leaders and local and regional leaders are extremely important for the political or whatever the drive the change. So then also group and entities, particularly important. And the third one is in terms of leadership variables. The third variable is external actors, including European Union, European Human Rights Court, and also European Commission, including international human rights and journalist associations. So, when we come to there are four forces of independent and enabling Turkish media system. There is really, in order to, if you want to make this media system more independent and enabling, there must be, we have to consider the four components of that system. The first one is effective public sector, including laws and regulations. The second one is dynamic private sector. For sure, Turkey is really very entrepreneur and dynamic private sector we have. And third is engaged society. Yes, we do have engaged society, civil society and pressure groups and etc., etc. But now they have really a lot in common with the media structure and management system that produces the content and provides the context. The first one is the owners. The owners, I have 5 archetypes for the owners of the private owners of Turkish political or Turkish media system. The one is private, but they are very parallel. They are extremely in terms of political parallelism. They are quite parallel. Who doesn't matter who comes to power, military coup d'etat or anti-democratic regime with the very anti-democratic applications. The second is the state or government-owned ownership, and the third one is government-owned, but government-controlled. I am sorry. But privately owned. This is a really interesting case, and I think we see in Chile, yesterday we were talking about, and some other countries. The fourth one is the, very interesting, Muslim religious sectarian, really interesting, couple, religious sectarian. They are a member of the certain religious sect. And the third one, fifth one is a political and ideological but private ownership. Let's say from the member of the from the ideological spectrum can be very like authoritarian views or ultra-nationalist or ultra-religious views. They have their own ownership and newspapers, and they are in terms of very plural, very diversified. The second one is professionals. I think now, if we wanna, in Turkish case, to deal with or respond to government or state is easy job. But for the authoritarianism, the media, editorial decision making, owners and professionals and columnists are extremely responsible. I can prove that. If you look at the Turkish media system, there is, before that, there are professionals like CEO and general managers and the board members, and they are the publicly traded, like in the Spain case, the rector was talking about. Publicly traded, some companies, particularly Dogan Group, which has the highest concentration level, the editors. An editor of the biggest Turkish journalist, which is publicly traded, saying that, I am editor, but also the professional who is in charge of to maximize the revenue and the shareholder value. Two hats, he says. I have two hats. That's really tough. And whenever the political party or the government changes, they try slowly, just parallel with their views. And the fourth one is columnists. Really interesting. If you look at the Turkish newspapers, it doesn't matter where they stand on the political spectrum. Columnists are still on power. Once they used to advocate democracy, then supported military coup d'etat or called for the military coup d'etat. And now supporting President Erdogan. I mean, we don't know where they stand. No values, no real reference point of view. And very interesting that these columnists have also programs on TVs and radio stations. So they are important public opinion makers. Then there are journalists who are news gatherers. These guys are like working bees, you know. They are really like a proletariat of the media sector. And unfortunately, we don't have really investigative journalism in Turkey. So, recommendation first, current private media editorial columnists are authoritarian. We have to change it. Change the current private media, privately owned media system, structure, management, and content creation process. The second, if you wanna, have the others respond, support independent, investigative, and citizen journalism, including editors at the first local then regional level. Cut the ties between national media system with, I call it swinging NGOs, swinging civil society associations like the columnists, interest groups and pressure groups, bureaucrats, and local mayors. They are selected. Mayors are selected, local governments and politicians. Third, shift power from national media system to regional and local media. In other words, empower local and regional level media. In order to do so, empower local leaders like mayors, businessmen association, and media, and local journalists and social media that are really like bloggers, local and regional level. And it should be created regional and local level knowledge, expertise, sharing mechanism. And another recommendation under this title, link local and regional groups, civil society leaders, and NGOs, and the pressure groups to exchange expertise and knowledge and to network with others at the regional and local level. And the other one is to create regional, local level multi-stakeholders, including national level, for media democratization platform, so that multi-stakeholders stakeholders can create dialogue between each other in order to discover and describe the challenges and priorities. That's what I want to say. So, in Turkish case, in order to respond authoritarian media regime, and I think we have to deal with the authoritarian media structure, which is made up by editors, I call it mafia editors, swinging columnists. They are like a mafia. They have been on power for minimum 25 years. And then make a grassroots movements at the local and regional level. Thank you.
Okay. And Sergio?
Okay. Do you have your control button?
No, just if you...
Just press the thing?
I believe you press the...
Oops,
Yeah,
it is. Well, I'm sorry to interrupt your afternoon, after lunch nap or your web browsing activities, but, and I'm a bit puzzled to be called to speak about authoritarianism. It maybe because we had some dictator called Pinochet some years ago, but in order to try to be proactive and to respond to Ellie's question of what to do next, and what can we do as researchers, I tried to set up some considerations. The details, I won't speak about my country. I wanted to present much more a more Latin American perspective. So I would say that that's the kind of big arguments I want to put up to you. First of all, this word of authoritarianism, basically it's also a question about how deep it is. In Chile, we had very famous hiatus of a dictatorship in the 70s with Pinochet. But before that, it used to be one of the longest and most stable democracies in the western part of the world. We had a much longer tradition of democracy than Spain, that Germany, Italy, Portugal, and most of the continent except Costa Rica and Uruguay. But all that changed after 1973 in a context of Cold War, which was very kind of traumatic for the whole region. We were swinging between the two poles of communism and anti-communism, sponsored by Mr. Nixon and Kissinger and others. So, but also there are some conditions that I think that are interesting or should be taken into account when you are speaking from an emerging country perspective. So I would like to stress on these two conditions. One is about how these types of countries like Chile and others fit into the development or the growth of technology. The other point is how really secure is the rule of law, and that's I think that it's relevant to consider the aspects of corruption and transparency, which are taken for granted many times. And also after that, I think that after doing this project, and also the other one with Marius Dragomir with the Open Society Foundation, I'm feeling that we are kind of missing the point. It seems that with the OSF project that Marius led, in which I participated during the Chilean chapter, it seems that digitization, it's not the final cause of what is going on. And now also the final conclusion of this huge book is that media concentration, apparently, it's not really what is going on. So what I would like to stress is the outcomes, the final objective of all these things that we are studying. What are they for? And basically, I would like to speak about welfare as a kind of the outcome that all these kind of data should lead us to, and that's why, what should we do with that? So, well, Chile, there are some, it's a small country, it's joined the OECD some years ago. It's a middle-income country, but growing very fast. Nowadays, the internet penetration has, the most recent figure is 70%. That figure of almost 51 was 3 years ago. And in this project, it emerged that it was the country with the highest penetration or percentage of foreign media ownership. It's a very open country. We have been traditionally like that. And this is one of the first considerations I wanted to show you. First of all, this is a map drawn by Jeffrey Sachs many years ago, qualifying the countries between innovators, adapters, and excluded. Chile has always been, and Latin America in general, an adapting country, taking technologies from outside, such as the notion of the nation state, the republic, the steam engine, and nowadays the internet and digital media. And sometimes that can be very helpful because you can leapfrog what the innovating countries can need to do when they are inventing the things. The other point is about probity and the rule of the law. Here you have that the high red means more corrupt, and the lighter you get, closer to yellow, you are less corrupt. Chile is an exception together with Uruguay, and if you look at the values, you would get that Chile ranks quite aside the United States and Uruguay and Ireland in terms of corruption. So it's a weird thing. We had a dictatorship, but traditionally the institutions had worked very well. It's a weird thing. But at the same time, there is a very interesting work by Elizabeth Fox. It's a bit dated right now, but afterwards I've never seen something more comprehensive. She tried to explain how the broadcasting industry developed in Latin America. So she coined this concept of accommodation. He never used the word corruption, but basically it means that the political power, those in power, accommodated corruptly, she didn't use the word, but corruptly with the media, private media, and they got something that was mutually beneficial, but not for the citizenship. So according to the intensity of that accommodation process, you would get three types of countries: the fully accommodated and monopolistic countries, such as Brazil, Mexico, Venezuela, and each one of them became accommodated and monopolistic in broadcasting in different political regimes. Brazil was a military dictatorship. Mexico was a one-party democracy, and Venezuela was a full democracy. So it's the kind of authoritarian thing, it's kind of weird here. And then you have the semi-fragmented countries in which this accommodation process wasn't as perfect as on those three: Colombia, Peru, Argentina, and finally the fragmented countries, Chile and Uruguay. But the funny thing was that in Chile we had, from 1973 up to 1990, one of the most tight-fisted and very vertically integrated dictatorships, that one of Pinochet, very stable, and also a very anti-communist dictatorship, and one of the pioneers worldwide of setting up the neoliberal paradigm in economics, even before Thatcher and before Reagan in the United States. So in broadcasting, there was no accommodation, and even today, the television market and the radio market is very fragmented and very competitive. But in the newspaper world, this was not the case, and there was a full accommodation process there, and there were two anti-communist conglomerates that even today are still dominant. And as Elie has concluded in the book, once you have these kind of media empires set up, it's very difficult to dismantle them. There have been many attempts before, and they haven't been successful. The only ones that have really eroded somehow their leadership were the Swedes, when they entered the Chilean market with this free newspaper, the Metro, Publimetro, those free newspapers that are distributed in the underground system. And all this for what? Basically, even though this method is kind of questionable, the Journalists Without Frontiers, you can here have all these is for what? Media concentration or digitalization. In terms of freedom of expression or press freedom, here you have the darker you get, the less press freedom or the less press freedom exists. So Chile is in a kind of mid situation. It's not so bad, but it's not in the top. Of course, for instance, Canada, where is our Canadian here? Well, Canada, Finland, those countries have very high levels of freedom of expression, of press freedom, according to this organization. And once again, when you take into consideration how Chile ranks, we are slightly above the United States, near Salvador, Botswana, in a kind of a upper middle range, but not in the top. So that's the final thing I wanted to say. If you take the different aspects that conform the media system, if we think that welfare is a kind of liquid that must be held within a container, a glass that we are going to drink, and you have, first of all, a certain reality, a territory, and along the years, you have a history in which the different factors build up. So I would say there are 4 factors to consider. First of all, technology, okay. The other one would be the socio-cultural aspects. For instance, Huseyin was speaking about the authoritarianism of the media professionals in Turkey. You have the institutional economic factors, and finally you have the corporate factors, how these media organizations, either content-based or platform-based, develop. And depending on how they grow and they reinforce each other, you can generate welfare, like water in a container. And right now we're having some technological advances. That means that one of the phases is growing and the other ones would eventually match up and hold more water. That means more welfare, supposedly. But usually in kind of developing countries, you would have some unequal developments, and usually the water spills out from the lowest factor. So in our case, for instance, in Chile, we have, even though it's a country that has some very advanced traits, we have, for instance, a much lower, a not very well-trained workforce. So for instance, in organizations, in different works that we have done, the economic development in Chile is not as good as it may be because most of the workforce is not as productive and efficient as, let's say, the United States. So when you consider welfare in general, there is something that spills the water out. And the challenge is how to match that. So, and paraphrasing Lenin, tomorrow I need to go to Russia, so remembering his work about what to do and what to do, all of us as researchers. Well, if there's no oil or a Cold War or decolonization around, which was very relevant in the second half of the 20th century, well, one idea, of course, is, well, there's a problem called the Marines. It's not very feasible. Blockage with Cuba, 50 years, and didn't work. Ignoring, there was a huge, terrible civil war in Congo, nobody cared about that. In China, there is this kind of, nobody speaks about the kind of authoritarian traits that it may have, nobody wants to touch China. That's another way. The other, what happened with Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship was the exposure and gradual opening to, let's say, different media content, because Pinochet didn't want to be compared with Fidel Castro, said, you know, this is not a, the word in Spanish is dictadura, dictatorship, which means hard dictator. This is a dicta blanda, a soft dictatorship. So he played with that and said, and because of that, he allowed some kind of dissent within his regime. But that's in a very macro thing, it's a kind of joke, but realistically, I think that we need to link what we are studying, ownership, digitization issues, with a much better definition of welfare. And I think that Raúl Katz showed in the morning something very interesting. For instance, consumer welfare or consumer satisfaction in terms of pricing. And there are many other things that should be considered, and it's within our reach, really, to do one study. And that's my proposal, and that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Great. questions? I know it's just after lunch and a lunch speaker and all that, but yeah. Anything from the audience? Ben?
Just your last point, link ownership, and could you elaborate on that? What does that really look like? What does your last point really look like in practice? What would it look like?
Yeah, I think that what Raul showed us in the morning, basically, you have these figures about media concentration, and we cannot get a conclusion about, well, is that finally good for the society, or the welfare of societies? So we need to to ground that into something like, for instance, pricing. I mean, does consolidation really means that prices would go up and consumer satisfaction would go down? And what Raul showed was that it was not the case. It wasn't like that. And I think that we need to really pick up very revealing dimensions of welfare that we should compare and relate with the kind of work we are doing as academics, because we can think of very, I would say, open-ended initiatives like let's unite and strive for democracy and all that, but that's not realistic. I think I'm a scholar, I can only do some research work and team up with people like you, and that's it. And I think that what is missing in the policy discussion is about all this talk about media concentration or fostering technology. Well, at the end of the day, how that translates into welfare. I think digitization, I think ownership concerns are means for the end of human welfare, like the UNDP does. So I think that we should think of indicators that may reveal and create a relationship between these phenomena we are studying. I'm not sure if we will be successful, but it's a proposal. Is it clear?
Any other questions? No? All right, I'd like to thank the panelists.